The MAGA civil war continues even in 2024 as Marjorie Taylor Greene and other far-right Republicans are making increasingly public threats to kick Speaker Mike Johnson out of his position if he agrees to bipartisan deals with Democrats over government funding and the southern border. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, it's deja vu all over again. We have several clips to play, but I just want to give you a bit of a recap. So Mike Johnson finds himself basically in the same position Kevin McCarthy did last year, except his position is even worse because House Republicans have had a very narrow majority since they took the majority after the 2022 midterms. But that majority has become increasingly small since Mike Johnson became Speaker. And there is a cadre of far-right Republicans in the Republican conference in the House that thinks that they can be the tail that wagged the dog. They think that their small minority of a very narrow majority in one chamber of Congress can dictate fiscal policy in the United States with respect to government funding and the crisis at the southern border, despite House Democrats, Senate Democrats who have the majority in the Senate, Senate Republicans who generally have been working in relatively good faith with the Democrats, and a Democrat in the White House. They don't seem to understand that they are outmatched here with respect to power. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene and other far-right Republicans are just making increasingly blunt and public threats to kick Mike Johnson out of his position if he's not able to somehow deliver a right-wing miracle.
No, I said that if he made that border deal, where if he passes that Senate border deal or so-called border deal, it's really an amnesty deal where Democrats are going to bring in millions and millions of illegals and turn them into Democrat voters. That's their plan, is to replace Americans with millions and millions of illegal aliens. And it upset me so much that this is the deal that Republicans in the Senate are making. And they want to do this in exchange for $60 billion more for Ukraine. Maria, our country's broke. We're like a corporation on the verge of bankruptcy with $34 trillion in debt. The border crisis is a national security crisis that has Americans everywhere. It doesn't matter how they vote. Americans everywhere are sick and tired and fed up with it. And we could talk about the numbers and we could talk about all the things that produce daily outrage. But the real situation here is if the Republican Speaker of the House and any Republican or really anyone elected to serve in the United States Congress should be supporting, protecting America's national security interests, and they would never vote for that deal. And that's why I told Speaker Johnson, if he made that deal in exchange for $60 billion for Ukraine, I would vacate the chair, and I still stand by those words.
So the vacate to chair is the mechanism. It's basically the American equivalent of a vote of no confidence. One person, all it takes is one Republican to trigger that vote. With Kevin McCarthy, it was Matt Gaetz. This time it might very well be Mike Johnson, Marjorie Taylor Greene for Mike Johnson. Just a couple of things before I play the next clip. Number one, immigrants in this country cannot vote until they become U.S. citizens, which is extremely difficult. So even if we, reshape various aspects of border policy to allow migrants to come in a limited capacity via visa, for example, they still can't vote. So she's just wrong about that. Number two, even if they did vote, there's no guarantee that they would vote for Democrats. As a matter of fact, like large cohorts of migrants who enter this country are religious conservatives. So perhaps Republicans could very easily appeal to religiously conservative immigrants who eventually become citizens, which again would be a small fraction, if they would stop being so xenophobic. So that's possible too. So everything Marjorie Taylor Greene said there was profoundly stupid. But it's not just about the issue with the southern border. It's also about a bipartisan deal for government funding. Now, as was the case with the border bill, Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats have been, for the most part, obviously they're still very terrible Senate Republicans, but for the most part, they've been acting in relatively good faith to avoid a government shutdown, which is coming potentially on January 19th. Again, thanks in large part to mostly to House Republicans who've repeatedly kicked the can down the road. So even when it comes to that bipartisan legislation, forget the border for a minute, just keeping the government funded, far-right Republicans are threatening to kick Mike Johnson out of his job if he works with Democrats in that capacity as well.
But it's a reality, and we have to look at it. If Speaker Johnson doesn't deliver on the conservative credentials that he promised us, then I suspect we will be looking for a new speaker. That's always an option, but that was a rule that was put in place many years ago. It's been voted on and it's been approved by this Congress. So, yeah, that is an option. If we don't like our boss, or we don't like the person that's in charge, we have the ability to remove them.
If that moves forward, if there's a potential shutdown, don't you think that'll hurt Republicans going into an election year?
I think we better stop worrying about political expediency and we better start worrying about our country. You know, it's these folks that are more worried about their portfolios than they are the people of this great country that have gotten us into this mess.
No, what got people into this mess, again, for the most part, was House Republicans, not even Senate Republicans. Kevin McCarthy, when he was Speaker of the House, made a deal with President Biden that produced the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023. And McCarthy and the Republicans had an obligation to honor that deal with respect to government funding. McCarthy reneged on that deal. He lied to Democrats. He lied to the president. He even lied to Republicans, too. He pissed off everybody and was fired as a consequence. But again, that very narrow majority, that unruly narrow majority that ultimately dethroned Kevin McCarthy, that majority is still unruly, and it's even smaller now. And unless Johnson, again, either delivers a right-wing miracle for these dangerously stupid Republicans or acts in good faith enough for the Democrats to save him, his position is in serious jeopardy. This is what he had to say with respect to the bipartisan deal on the budget. He's been given, a lot of pressure to walk away from that deal. But so far, he seems to be reluctant to do so.
After weeks of hard-fought negotiations, we achieved a strong top-line agreement that allows our Appropriations Committee and all those who work on this to complete the appropriations process. It's an important part of keeping the government running. The top-line agreement includes hard-won concessions to cut more billions, as you know, from the IRS giveaway and the COVID-era slush funds. It replaces accounting gimmicks from the prior FRA agreement, and it brings Congress much closer to regular order, which is our big commitment here. In keeping with my commitment to bring members into the legislative process, I've spoken and received feedback this week from many members all across the Republican conference. That's a very important part of this. When I became Speaker, I committed to decentralizing the Speaker's office and making this a member-driven process. That's been part of this. Our top-line agreement remains. We are getting our next steps together, and we are working toward a robust appropriations process.
So he's saying, at least with all the pressure facing him now, the top line agreement with Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans remains, which is about 1.6, 1.7 trillion, commensurate with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Again, that's infuriated the far right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tim Burchett and Chip Roy, because it's basically in line with what McCarthy agreed with the president last year. I want to play another clip from Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's much more fiery here because she's having a conversation with Steve Bannon about, again, these bipartisan deals that Johnson wants to make or is willing to make because he really has no other choice with the Democrats.
The rest of it, Biden's regime basically shuts itself down.
No, if I'm Speaker of the House, I finish the job in the House. I pass the appropriation bills. And then I tell Chuck Schumer in the Senate, it's your job now, buddy. You do your work. And then we'll talk. But right now, Mike Johnson is getting rolled in meeting after meeting after meeting. When he is talking to Jake Sullivan and Chuck Schumer every day and impressed with these Four Corners meetings, but he's not talking to me and other important members in our Republican conference at all about any of the negotiations and any of the plans and exactly what we want to see done. He's failing on the job. But the biggest red flag for me, Steve, right now that has me livid is this deal with Ukraine. This is a losing war. It is a losing issue. The American people do not support it. Our border security is not a negotiating tool for the Ukraine war that the Pentagon loves and Joe Biden loves and the Democrats love, and that these rhino neocon Republicans and Nikki Haley is frothing at the mouth over because her donors support it. No. Mike Johnson should not be going in there with Chuck Schumer and saying, oh, yeah, we're going to make this deal where 5,000 illegal aliens, not migrants, cross the border every damn day so you can get $60 billion over to Zelensky, the most corrupt president in the world right now, because Ukraine is not the 51st state. Every day Mike Johnson gets closer and closer to this deal, brings me closer and closer to vacating the chair, because I have absolutely had it.
Again, Marjorie Taylor Greene is in a position of weakness. Relative overall, she's certainly in a position of great influence over Mike Johnson, right? Because, again, of Mike Johnson's narrow majority. But again, the fact of the matter is the math doesn't change. Right now, effectively, Republicans have a 2-seat majority in one chamber of Congress. They are ultimately no match for the Democrats in this respect. Democrats have the majority in the Senate. They're relatively coherent. Senate Republicans, for the most part, are working with them as well. So that's another thing to consider. And they have a Democrat president who can veto anything that House Republicans want to push out. They are not the tail that wags the dog. Marjorie Taylor Greene stupidly thinks they can be. To be sure, there's probably some concessions to make where they can very strategically apply pressure, but this idea that they're going to dictate terms to the president, Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, and House Democrats is insane. But that doesn't change the fact that Mike Johnson, again, is in a rock and a hard place. This is what Jake Sherman from Punchbowl News had to say on the matter, and he's one of the most intimately aware reporters with respect to congressional activity.
Do you get a feeling that his job may be on the line, much the way the speaker?
Yes.
So okay,
I do get that feeling. I get that feeling because this is here's the thing, Katie, and I've been wrestling with this myself and with our colleagues in our reporting. Everyone said with McCarthy, they'll never kick him out. They don't have the guts to do that. And they did, and they kicked him out. Now we have a narrower majority, and the same people are agitating about the same things against the speaker. Why should we think that they won't kick him out?
Precisely. But again, it's an election year, right? And if Democrats play their cards right, they can absolutely relentlessly hammer Republicans on this to the American people. The American people have a very short attention span, so the proximity to the election might be beneficial for us if we play our cards right, if Republicans choose to do this. We can say to voters, listen, you may have your disagreements, your good faith disagreements with President Biden, either from the further progressive left or, the more right-leaning perspective, but at least Democrats, for the most part, are the adults in the room. At least they try. They're the responsible governing party. Republicans, particularly in the House, are terrible. They're stupid. They're corrupt. They're unethical. They constantly fight amongst themselves. They have an incoherent agenda. It's all about owning the libs. It's the least productive iteration of Congress in decades because of them. They can't govern. They can't run a lemonade stand. If you want Republicans to worry about gas stoves or whatever shoe the cartoon green M&M is wearing, okay, that's what they're good for. In terms of, actually running a country, they objectively suck. They are objectively inferior to Democrats. On their very best day, they are inferior to Democrats with respect to governing a country. And so maybe you should consider voting blue in November, even if you were otherwise predisposed to voting red, because at least the country will not be bursting into flames, whereas it will if Republicans get their way. Pretty compelling argument as far as I'm concerned. We'll see what happens. A government shutdown is supposed to occur in 5 days, again, because of House Republicans kicking the can down the road. We're going to do another video at a different time, probably in the next couple of days, about the border situation and the bad faith from the Republican Party with respect to that, because there's a lot more to unpack. But let me know what you think of in the comments section, and let me know if you have any sympathy at all for Mike Johnson, because I don't.